Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Lincoln Rhyme. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, this case ends up being a very interesting case that the team ends up taking upon because it turns out that there was a murder victim found in a decom field where basically bodies that they... that are, given to science and stuff like that. People have died, like they give like permission to use their body for science and stuff like that. Basically, they put people's their bodies in different varying conditions to see how they handle it. Because basically, it's meant to help like solve crimes, to be like, all right, this shows you what the body looks like in this, circumstances, or if animals are involved, yada yada yada, so on and so forth. The victim in this case is a dude named Josh, but the complicated thing is that Josh's brother Ben is saying that he knows who's the perpetrator behind all this is their stepfather Ray, because Josh and his brother Ben believe that Ray killed their mom, who died some time ago. Well, then in the grand scheme of things, we end up finding out the reason why this is all even more interesting is because, I say interesting, but it's actually super sad in the end that basically their mom's body was, donated to science like 8 months prior. And then literally that 8 months later, Josh died like almost, I think they said like 20 feet away from where his mom's body was. It's like, that's actually super depressing and morbid and just sad in the grand scheme of things. It was also interesting too because and I keep saying the word interesting, which the only person that finds all this really interesting is Kate, because she got super excited about all this. And because even at one point, it's like, Amelia, you need to go out there for me. And, Lincoln was saying that. And it's like, no, Kate wants to go out there. She could super go in my, stead. But obviously Lincoln still sends Amelia out. But because of everything going on with Claire this episode, Lincoln goes, fine. Kate, you can go, which she got so excited about. Which has an interesting element to this episode too, because Lincoln is a little more persnippety than he typically is. And the reasoning is because Claire kind of pissed him off because she invited this dude who's in kind of a similar situation to him. I think it was like a firefighter named Fred. Because Fred doesn't, obviously it's the thing of Lincoln stopped kind of living a lot of his life because obviously New York, he breathed New York. He felt every step. It just felt good. But because he lost a lot of his mobility, he doesn't get out at all. And so because of that, Fred being there, reminder of things you can't do, which obviously Fred is yeah, there's things you might not be able to do, but it's kind of but you might not have been able to do them the exact way you were able to before. For example, because of his hand, Fred couldn't grasp the chess piece like he wanted to, but he still managed to do it his own way with his new condition. So it's that it isn't the end. Just because, our circumstances have changed doesn't mean that we can't still just kind of go out there and basically live our lives. The world hasn't stopped, it's still out there waiting for us to explore essentially. But because of that, Lincoln didn't appreciate Claire hand. Obviously it came from a good place, but it turns into this thing of Claire ends up admitting that the fact of the matter is, agoraphobia. The fact of the matter is she has a fear of crowds and stuff like that. Which actually kind of feeds into an interesting conversation that Lincoln's brought up in the past where he, in the beginning, he said the reason why Claire works so well with him is because broken people kind of are able to help broken people more than anyone else was able to. So they kind of complement each other in the sense that opposites attract. Lincoln, who has the ability to leave but refuses to, and leave his place, and Claire, who has the freedom to, but who can, but doesn't because of her condition. Like I said, they're opposites to each other, which adds this interesting dynamic to their relationship. And obviously it plays into obviously Felix is I get it. Lincoln, he's really good. He's actually kind of the best. So I'm obviously, because of his job, I'm able to do what I, couldn't do in other places. But obviously a lot of times he takes a lot of shit from Lincoln. And it's not just because of Lincoln's condition. He kind of dealt with a lot of this beforehand too. Obviously you can make the argument it's kind of gotten worse, but the thing is, it's sometimes it's just not worth it dealing with all the Lincoln stuff, because it wasn't just Claire that got yelled at. It wasn't just Felix. Obviously he got snippy with Kate, because obviously Felix is trying to work on a bone collector stuff and this, but he's no, you told me to put everything towards a bone collector. He's no, solve this case. It's you're, which direction do you really want me to point? And I'll go in that direction. It's just kind of like you're not giving me clear cut instruction, because I would say, because obviously for Felix, he understands what this bone collector case means, so it's like he would assume that would take precedence over this, but it's like the bone collector stuff can wait. This is a murder that's right now in front of us. The longer we wait, probably the more evidence that can kind of potentially slip away. I think that's kind of potentially the mentality that Lincoln might have about it. What also makes his case complicated, not just about like the potential, like not just the way the bodies were found, but like this whole situation for them to be found in the decom fields like that and stuff like that. The fact is, even Josh's body was like wiped down, so there was no evidence, because there was offensive marks, but no evidence left behind because someone did a good job cleaning his body. Meaning, whoever did it had some forensic training. So literally, any of the hundreds of people, because it's like 100 people per semester. And obviously, so, because whoever killed Josh was obviously covering up for the fact is that they killed his mom, because they actually look into it and like basically she was poisoned like with arsenic. And so it turns out, okay, so that potentially is what Josh found out, because like his mom's file was actually completely empty. Like any real evidence and stuff like that had actually disappeared. There's no backup files and stuff like that. So it showed, because obviously the lady who ended up finding Josh's body, she actually was looking into it for Josh because she was trying to help. And that was the whole thing where it seemed like Ray seemed like he was the one behind all this, because he had the motive of like the life insurance policy on their mom, Grace. But the fact is he has a strong alibi, and someone who has the opportunity seems like they were actually, that being the teaching assistant lady who ended up finding Josh's body, is like she was actually trying to help Josh find out what happened to his mom. So it's like two perfectly good suspects who are obviously kind of covered by the fact is of like alibis and just their respective situations. Like I said, the teacher assistant situation of wanting to help with the investigation. So it's like, okay, so like I said, it kind of still keeps their suspect list open in the grand scheme of things. There's also this interesting element with Josh's brother Ben and Amelia, because obviously Ben is very like, oh no, I need to get answers. He shows up at the police station. Come when it's like, oh, Amelia, you have a visitor. I was like, who's this going to be? And it ended up being Ben, because he's so obsessed with the case, because obviously this case has been an obsession of Josh and his brothers, because it's like, the fact of the matter is our mom was killed. Like we got to figure out, oh, it was Ray. We know he did it. Because the Ray ends up saying that became about because Ray kept them from seeing their mom when she was nearing her end, like when things were getting real bad. He didn't want the kids to see her like that, but because he kind of kept it top secret like that, they kind of started, in particular Josh kept feeling like, oh, you got something to hide or something. Like it's that thing of like, you need someone to blame. I mean, it turns out in the grand scheme of things they were right, but I think it probably just started from the fact is you just so much stuff kind of compiled that you were like, yeah, there's got to be something going on here, and it turns out in fact there was something going on there. So, but it's just that situation of, I think because Josh is going, like, this was their battle, like this was about our mom, but now not only is his mom gone, his dad but his aunt. Well, because they ended up, I forgot the conversation about their dad. Like they had lost their dad like pretty early on. I don't remember. I'm blanking on what that whole conversation was about. But it's like, once again, they lost their mom, and now Ben lost his brother, so he's lost all of his family. So it's like, obviously he has to carry on his brother's like will. So like and obviously Amelia's trying to skirt around it by being like, yeah, if things lead to Ray, okay, but if they don't, like the fact of the matter is, I'm gonna give you updates on the case. I'm gonna let you know what's what. I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm gonna let you know that despite how anything turns out, I'm not gonna stop until I get you the answers you deserve. Because Amelia kept saying like, I understand what you're going through, and he's like, no, you don't. And she's like, you're right. I don't. No one can understand the pain you're going through losing your family like that. The only family you have. And it's that thing, well, obviously Amelia can understand, but obviously that's the thing of like, you're not trying to turn this into a competition. You're like, everyone experiences grief, and I can't know what it's like to lose, because I lost my parents. You lost your mom. You literally lost your entire family. Like, you lost your mom, and now you've lost your brother. Like, at least she, in her circumstances, still has her sister Rachel. So it's, like I said, different circumstances. So I just thought that was an interesting element to it. I also thought another interesting element to this was like, obviously, like, Amelia being like, oh yeah, you seem your very chipper self today, because obviously she picked up on him kind of being snippy with everyone. So it's like, obviously you want to make this work environment a little more, okay for everyone. So it's like what was it he tried? I think he promised not to kind of lose his cool or something like that. Again, I forgot what the exact wording was, but it was something along those lines. And it seemed like throughout the rest of the episode, it seemed like he did kind of keep up with that. So I thought that was neat. But looking into the doctor, the medical examiner behind all this, his name ended up being on both Grace's autopsy as well as Josh's. So it's like, all right, he didn't bring that up. I think it's kind of interesting you don't bring up the fact that you worked on both the mother and the son. That's a little suspicious. And then when they bring it up of like, all right, well, let's get Josh's body. We're going to get another party to examine it because we got Ben, a family member, to give us leeway on that. And it's like, oh yeah, sorry, but Josh's body's cremated. It's like, you're not even hiding. Like, yes, that works in your favor because it's like, oh, I'm sorry, like there was an accident, but it's like, it's just, oh, you just happen to have an accident where like, oh, there was a miscommunication and Josh's body was cremated. It's just like, that just makes you look, I mean, granted, there's no evidence, but it just super logistically make you look super, super guilty. So there's that whole situation. So, but it turns into a really interesting thing because obviously, like, you know, Amelia is talking to the woman that was like Grace's best friend who took Ben and Josh in, more in particular took Ben in. But the fact of the matter is, while she's talking about the doctor, is like, oh, do you know him? It's like, oh no, like because like Grace was like an accountant at like that institute and everything, and so was her friend. And then all of a sudden the cat literally walks by because they had gotten a cat hair earlier in the episode, and it's like, a piece of evidence literally just walked by us. And it turns out in the grand scheme of things, like Amelia kind of sets things off because it's like, well, they didn't have any really factual evidence at the time, so Amelia kind of like draws at it at that moment to kind of push her to kind of do something so that they can basically get her on the more offensive, so that now put her in a position where like now we have the proper ammunition to kind of actually investigate her, because it is kind of messed up because it's like, oh, that's why you took in Josh and Ben, why you're actually looking after them, because you're feeling guilty about the fact is that you're the one that poisoned their mom. Because it turns out that basically that doctor was that doctor and her were embezzling money from the institute, and the fact is Grace came upon it, and because they were best friends, she confronted her first, and sadly, like the doctor told her how to make it, you know, look like illness rather than her actually being poisoned. And so now they ended up killing Josh to kind of cover that up because Josh ended up finding out the truth. That's got to be disheartening, find out the person that you relied on, person you thought was kind of like also family to you, ended up being the one that took away, in Josh's case, your mom, in Josh and Ben's case, your mom, but in Ben's case, both your mom and your brother. But the complicated thing is because he's so adamant to get answers, he thought he already got the answers he needed from Amelia, so he went after the doctor anyway. But luckily, Amelia was able to step in the way, and she was like, I know you don't want to shoot me. The fact of the matter is, you just put the gun down. You don't have to do this. I will get you your answers. And they end up breaking it down and explaining why. And obviously for Ben, he feels bad because he's like, I blamed you. I thought, I was so sure that you're the one that did it, you know, talking to his stepdad, Ray. But Ray's like, all I ever wanted was to be a father to you guys. So come home. And Ben's like, yeah, I'd like that. So there's a silver lining to this, that it all kind of worked out like that. I mean, it's sad that, it cost them, so much, so, but at least they're kind of together now, and the end, and like all that suspicion is kind of gone now. So there's that whole situation. I did also appreciate at the end, Kate being like, oh yeah, I put a bow in it. He's like, did you literally go to the store and put a, she's like, no, I have plenty of bows at home. I just thought that was kind of, pretty neat. But, obviously, and I like that scene with Lincoln and Claire where he's like, Claire, I'm not really good at this whole apologizing thing, because she's like, yeah, because you don't really do it at all. He's like, all right, so how about we skip to the part where, I say like, I didn't mean anything that I said. And so, and for her, she's like, yeah, but the fact of the matter is she recognizes but she says I'm only here to help I'm not here to push you. Because that was something she had brought up earlier, that she kind of felt like she crossed the line. But I like what Lincoln says, where it's like, the fact of the matter is they can be one and the same. You're helping me by pushing me. Sometimes I'm not willing to push myself, just because he's so down about his situation that he's just not willing to even give up, try to give himself a chance. So he, it's like, well, that kind of annoyingly optimistic Fred, let's call him up. And so him and Lincoln are outside, and it's like, well, Lincoln's like, well, all the great stuff, all the stuff that I'm so great at, and sounding so narcissistic, he's like, asking for help is not something I'm really good at. And Fred's almost like, oh, really? I'm so surprised to hear that. But them having a chess match and everything, I thought was kind of neat. And it's like, oh, it's just one of those instances, because he's like, well, I can either slowly move the pieces one by one, or we could do the thing of asking for help. And they ask someone to kind of move the pieces for him. And I love when he comes back, he's like, yeah, I beat him in like 7 moves. So it's like, but still, the fact is, the Lincoln took that opportunity. It's a different circumstances, but you can tell there was almost like this, almost in like deep breath of like being able to kind of be out there again, kind of smelling that air again. So I think that's going to be, I'm curious to see what that means kind of going forward. I doubt we're going to see a lot of him doing that, because obviously a lot of it's going to be him staying back home for investigations. But I think going forward, we could potentially see him kind of out and about more in that regard. So I think that's going to be an interesting element to this. And then finally, on another side of this episode, we deal with everything with the Bone Collector. And it's so interesting when we kind of get some of his like talk about why he goes after Jane, because he was like, oh, like your tone is so mocking and stuff like that. It's like, oh, is it because, oh, once again, it's her being nosy and stuff like that. But I guess it's also because, well, as we can tell, like the reason why he went after Lincoln just to prove himself, because Lincoln looked down upon him. He doesn't like people of condescending tones. And obviously that's what Lincoln's got that in strides, his condescending tone. And so it seems like that's kind of a main reason why he's going, the Bone Collector is killing Jane. Him and Danielle are moving, and it's like, okay, so what's that all about? They're cleaning up the place and everything. And at the same time, Felix was able to look into the phone situation. He wasn't able to kind of do what he wanted to. They were able to get a bit of the Bone Collectors, from the back and side, a tiny bit, because of a reflection of like, oh yeah, like the bones that were mailed off, they see the person he paid, and there's a reflection of the Bone Collector, but they don't get a good enough look. And because of the whole cell thing, they bounce its signal, and they see the different spots that the call came through, but it all leads into a line all heading back to New York, which it turns out that's where Danielle and the Bone Collector, they're circled back home to New York. So it kind of benefits him. I guess that was another thing. I guess Jane was also meant to be like all that extra push for them to kind of move away. Maybe they were already going to be in the process of moving anyway. Because the sad thing is, because even the Bone Collector was like, yeah, the fact of the matter is, you were a good friend to Danielle. You actually made her happy, which made me happy. So it made him kind of a little bit like, I'm sorry to, I had to do this. But obviously, all good things have to come to an end at some point in time. So it's interesting to hear that. It's like, oh yeah, like, you're annoying, but the fact of the matter is, you were a good friend to my wife, and that made her happy, so it made me happy. And it's just weird to hear a serial killer say that. I mean, to be fair, like, he hides his serial killerness by just seeming like a normal person. I mean, that's kind of the whole point. But now it's like Lincoln and the team are aware that he's back in New York. I didn't think much of it, even when we kept seeing the reflection of like him on the phone. It didn't correlate in my head when he went up to the attic to get that, or like, he pulled down the little attic stairs and got the phone. It still didn't correlate, because I was like, oh, well, it just didn't piece it together in my head of like, oh, that being the same phone. But we see him dispose of it in New York, so they could probably end up tracing it. But I mean, that won't do anything in the long run, because like I said, they already know he's in New York. But maybe there'll be some cameras nearby that lets them kind of check it out. But it's like, yeah, they've got somewhat of a description, but like I said, it's more like a 20% description, and that's from the back, and even that's not a clear-cut description. So a lot of steps going forward with this whole thing. Like, they're not that much closer, but they've still taken some steps forward. But sadly, the Bone Collector is back in town, and he's ready to play. He's made it clear. So back to this interesting clash. So I'm interested to see ultimately where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and Goodbye.